Ladies and gentlemen, would you kindly take your seats? We will begin the next session very shortly. Okay, everybody, welcome back from the coffee break. This next session is an extension of what Roger Baker just presented, but the focus now flips over to China. On the surface, what China is trying to do is to be with Russia, signal neutrality, and not be compromised financially. But in life as we know it, it's very difficult to have the cake and eat it at the same time. To take us through China's inner sanctum, this leaves us with a nice segue to the next speaker, which is Dr. Tan Kong Yam. Dr. Tan's distinguished career includes working for the World Bank office in Beijing as a senior economist, and prior to that, he was the chief economist for the Singapore government at the Ministry of Trade and Industry. And he was also the head of Department of Strategy and Policy at the NUS Business School. Moderating the session will be my colleague, Dr. Chua Akbin. And so, Akbin, over to you.
Thank you for joining us for the second section. So just a brief background, if you don't know Dr. Tan, he's currently a professor at NTU. He's also deputy chairman of APS Asset Management and sits on the boards of Sabana Jurong, sits on the board of CapitaLand China Trust, as well as Changi Airport. So I think you can see from his extensive background, Dr. Tan was actually assistant to the late Dr. Goh Keng Swee, the late Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore during Lee Kuan Yew's time, when Dr. Goh was invited by Mr. Deng Xiaoping to advise on China's economic development strategy. In 2002 to 2005, Dr. Tan was a senior economist at the World Bank office in Beijing. He was an expert group for China's 11th five-year plan. And prior to moving to Beijing, he was the chief economist in Singapore for 4 years at the Ministry of Trade and Industry. So with that, I'll pass it to Dr. Tan, who will go through some of the slides. I'm interviewing a few questions, but please, feel free to put in your questions on the Slido app, and then we'll try to, take as many questions as we can at the end of his presentation. Dr. Tan?
Yes, thank you, Harbin. My presentation is entitled Xis New Era, Strategic Implications for ASEAN and the World. And I basically focus on 5 points. Firstly, I will talk about a very important point, the long game of China in tech contestation with the US, and that is a very significant underlying reason for the tension. Then I go into details about Xi Jinping. Our friend wants to stay longer, so I put up to 235, and I explain the dynamics. And then I go on to talk about the Ukraine war. I will argue that the Ukraine war actually will lower the temperature and of the Crossroads relation. And then I talk about ASEAN, which is a very important chief beneficiary. As you're aware, everybody now want to cultivate ASEAN. And then I talk about, lastly, to summarize the future trends and implications for ASEAN and global investors like you. Now, to understand China, one has to go deep into China's psyche, the deepest fear and the dark forces driving the leaders and the country. And that is to give you a perspective of the Schumpeter technology wave. You look at the last 250 years, there has been all the times new high-tech technology that were developed. In the early period, the British dominate 1785 to 1900, and the key innovations were steam engine and steel. Now, what does that mean? If you have steam engine, your ship can sail from UK to Guangzhou. If you got steel, you have a cannonball. You develop into big economy, but you also are a strong military, and that is the origin of the Opium War. China never forget the 150 years of humiliation was because they lost out on the technological rivalry to the West. A lot of people didn't realize in November 2nd, 2018, I noticed it was not well reported in the Western media, but one of the most significant meetings was held on November 2nd, 2018. I've been watching China for over 30 years. I've never seen a meeting like this. You look at the people who were there. Xi Jinping was chairing it. Then out of the top 7, 3 of them were there. Our friend Liu He was there. 12 cabinet ministers were there. What were they doing? They invited 52 private, these are private entrepreneurs, not SOE, not others, private entrepreneur to tell Xi Jinping what to do. Out of the 52, 10 of them, each of them were given 5 minutes to tell Xi Jinping what to do. It was a very, very significant meeting, which I think the outside world did not fully appreciate. I try to understand the situation, and with my special access, I even know where the seating arrangement, who is going up and down. But basically, the 4 key people who were the main top speakers were Tang Xiao'er, Qian Jianfeng. These were the people who were focusing on AI, encryption technology, AI chips and other things. And it's important to understand why is that way. A lot of you might be wondering how come this Xi Jinping want to hammer Jack Ma and TT and all this. In China now, there is a view that they should try to separate hard tech from consumer tech. Hard tech refer to these guys, the kind of technology that would ensure, AI, semiconductor, quantum computing, that will ensure that China will not miss out on this. These are the equivalent of steam engine and cannonball in the modern era. They want to make sure that the best talent, the best capital, the best resources are going into hard tech, this type of tech, not just going a lot to consumer tech that might make a lot of money, Alibaba, TT. One of the internal meeting in China is very significant. One of the key policy maker asked, TT, Meituan, what's so big deal about delivering my noodles 5 minutes faster? You have to understand the deep psychology behind it. So they see talent and capital leading towards this. And of course, there's another dimension that might be a bit more sensitive, which I might not elaborate. That is that, a lot of these people who make money, whether it's Alibaba, Tencent, Meituan, make their money under Jiang Zemin. So the groups of them, whether it is Jiang Zemin, Chen Jinhong, Liu Yinshan, Tai Xianglong, all these guys were the whole gang there. So Xi Jinping see capital, the tech, and Alibaba and tech as a potential challenge to the power pyramid of the CCP. So they don't want the tech, the power derived from there and the wealth to overwhelm and challenge the CCP, which to them is the sole source of power pyramid that should dominate the country. So they don't want Wall Street, tech to take over like what they did in the White House. So it's important to understand that dynamics. And
Can I
sure,
intervene
sure.
because I guess this is a key point for the markets, because there's talk of some relaxation on the China's crackdown on tech.
That's right.
So on the anti-monopoly or excessive gaming. So do you think it's really the case that China will start relaxing, some of these regulations on tech?
Yeah, good question. Basically, Jack Ma is a flamboyant guy. I met him before. You cannot blame him. No? He's he's considered a failure in China because he took 7 years to finish his primary school. Then he took the high school exam 3 times. He didn't do very well. But he is a good entrepreneur and he make it. So he wants to assert himself. So he has his own foreign policy and everything. But in China, this is not like US. You cannot be a Elon Musk running around and jumping over the White House. This is the emperor. No, you cannot be funny. So they taught him a lesson. He tried to start. You go to Suzhou, the Hangzhou, the West Lake. He set up academy. He got a lot of think tank people. He tried a round table. He tried to set up a think tank to challenge government in terms of intellectual and policy. So they closed it down, and then the name was wiped off. China, there is only one power pyramid. Everybody else can be very powerful, but you should not challenge the power pyramid. And that's the reason why they make an example of him. And there will be other people who become very significant and very successful in tech, But this lesson on Jack Ma is to show that there is a red line here that you should not step over as a private sector entrepreneur. You can do very well, you can be very rich, but remember there's only one boss, the CCP. Yeah. So, okay, then I move on to role of C over the next 10 years. Now, as some of you might be aware, there are 3 political factions in China. Jiang Zemin is the main faction, and he was very powerful after Deng died. He was strong in the military, in the party, and everything. And then the Hu Jintao's faction, who is Jiang Zemin's successor, but he is somewhat weaker. Jiang Zemin was very strong, but over time he has weakened. You can see from this chart that 2002 he was quite robust. You can see, and then 2012 he was quite weakened. 2022 you cannot see him because he is no longer around. He's 96. He's sometimes not coherent. So his problem is that he has a lot of prodigy that he promoted, but they're getting older. So he wasn't able to get some of the young guy coming up. And then of course Hu Jintao is Hu Jintao is a weaker president. He promoted a lot of his prodigy at the provincial level. You become party secretary, you become others. Then after that, you can rise to Beijing. But Xi Jinping came in and he blocked a lot of their promotion. So in a way, his Hu Jintao's faction is also significantly weakened. Then, of course, Xi Jinping. This is the latest March 2022 MPC meeting. Anybody notice something significant? This is Li Keqiang, number 2. He has only 1 cup. This guy had 2 cups, this is significant. Both cups have tea leaves. In China, you have to read the tea leaves carefully. This is a signal to all the 5,000 delegates that there is the first among equal in the power structure. So this is a very demonstrative effect at the higher level. And if you see, when I was at the World Bank, I was working on the 11th 5-year plan with Ben Jiabao's office. At that point, we focus a lot on 5 year. Every time is 5 year. Next 5 years, what are the plan? What are the development on Guangdong? What are the development in the car industry? You notice the recent 5 year plan, 2021 to 2025, is significantly underemphasized. The focus now is on 2035, 15-year plan. Whether you look at the Xiong'an development, or you look at the Beidou, or their Chinese the satellite system equivalent of the GPS, a lot of the Chinese project now has a 15-year horizon rather than a 5-year horizon. Internal party documents also greatly emphasize, 10-year, 15-year horizon in terms of catching up with the US on technology. The next 10 years, the ocean will be more turbulent. And what does that mean? That means you need a experienced captain and steady hand. So these are very subtle things. You read the People's Daily, you read the Liberation Army's Daily. These are some of the key messages that are significant in the broad situation. And a lot of Chinese analysis show that the next 10 years will be decisive in terms of, the technological revolution, whether it's AI, big data, quantum computing, biotech, and everything. And the Chinese see like EV, especially electric vehicle, they see themselves as behind in technology. But if there's a structural change, they can leapfrog. They say that they are weak in the automotive, the combustion engine. So Toyota, BMW is in front. But if you have EV, you can leapfrog and then you can bypass the lane. That is the plan in China's strategic thinking and in a lot of their planning, especially for the next 10, 15 years.
So Kuan Yew, again, I want to raise a question because Josh Soros warned that China's zero COVID strategy and strict lockdowns in Shanghai is undermining President Xi's support and jeopardizing his plans to extend his term. So do you agree that there's actually such factions and infighting and friction because of the lockdowns? And does this actually threaten President Xi?
Yeah, some element of that is there. I think to be fair, there are a lot of old people who are not vaccinated and their vaccine is not as strong and they're not taking the mRNA from outside because I think there's a strategic worry that this might become a dependence. So there is a fear of vulnerability. But there's also significant dynamics there because Shanghai, as you are aware, is the power base of Jiang Zemin. People like Han Zheng, who is now number 7 in the party, in the Politburo Standing Committee, is Jiang Zemin's guy, and he has a lot of network within Shanghai. So as you are aware, Xi Jinping has a big prodigy called Li Qiang, who he helicopter into Shanghai as the number 1 party secretary, hoping to promote him to become potentially the next PM. So if Shanghai is managed very well, it will enhance Xi Jinping's prestige and Li Qiang will get promoted to next PM. But if Shanghai is a big mess and there's a lot of conflict, left hand don't know right hand what to do and all kinds of things, then it will undermine Xi Jinping's position. It will strengthen Jiang Zemin and Han Zheng's position, and it will maybe even torpedo Li Qiang's career. So there is a lot of public health issues. There's also some conflicting dynamics. So let me say a few words about the Ukraine war. This is Taiwan. Taiwan is a very important part of a geostrategic chessboard. You have to look at Taiwan from the first island chain perspective. These are US military bases, and these are China's bases. Taiwan is at the middle of this first island chain, and if Taiwan is a trapdoor. If China takes Taiwan and then it stations missile here, it will significantly threaten US in terms of threaten Japanese, Okinawa, Guam, and Korea. If Taiwan flip as a trapdoor to the other side, and if US has a missile here, all the places here will be significantly threatened. So it is a very critical piece in the chessboard. Unsinkable aircraft carrier, more important than Guam, more important than Okinawa overall. So this explains why all the way back in the 90s, China has always drawn the red line at Taiwan. And the reason why they build up all these islands here is a way to defense. If the US plane and submarine comes, they basically have this denial policy to block them. So this explains why the South China Sea and Taiwan is so critical in terms of the Chinese defense. The same way as the US in the early days moved towards the Caribbean and then dominate the Cuba and all the others to prevent the Europeans from staging missiles or others in the early days to threaten the US mainland. So this, in a way, is a reason why South China Sea and Taiwan is so important. And of course, the key thing here is that nuclear second strike. If you are worried that China might hit LA, you dare not hit Shanghai. But how confident can China be that China can hit LA after US hit Shanghai? You will have to have the nuclear weapon not hiding in the silo in the land because the spy satellite can take it, but actually moving around under the submarine second strike. And the submarine second strike can only be effective if the water is very deep. You go and hide around East China Sea, the water is not deep enough. The US, they can find it. But this one, some parts is about 35,000 meters. So you can hide and then sleep there, and then you can hit. So this explains why some of these dynamics that are quite complex. Fortunately, as I said, the China discovered that when the Ukraine war started, the US has imposed sanctions on Russia. As you are aware, China actually, rhetorically, you look at China, it has actually support Russia. But in actual practice, it has not. You should not separate all this noise from actual. They haven't really, supply the semiconductor. They haven't supplied any help to Russia. Even Janet Yellen and Anthony Blinken mentioned that. That's because they are worried that the US secondary sanction can actually affect them, whether it hit them on choke points of semiconductors, whether it hit them on the software, or whether it hit them on the biotech, or whether it hit them on the aviation. China also buy the Boeing and Airbus from US and Europe. What happens if the spare parts don't come? You know, and then of course the financial nuclear bomb of the reserve being frozen, or the kick out from the shift transfer of the financial side. So these are significant things that China is very cautious about, and they are rhetorically give Putin a sense of major support, but on the actual situation, they have done very little to violate the US sanction. So they are playing on both ends of the game. So
Kong Yam, on that,
sure.
I guess I mean, is China struck by the extent of the sanctions? Will China take steps to sanction-proof its economy? Which part is it most fearful about? The ban from the Swiss system, the freezing of all its the reserves. Will it make the
Yeah, I
renminbi
think
more
the
international?
freezing of the reserve was unanticipated, and even Janet Yellen said that it might not be legal. You can freeze some oligarch or Jiang Zemin's grandson's asset is okay, but you freeze a country's asset is unprecedented. And what does that mean for everybody else, including say Japan or Singapore, who is holding US Treasury bills and bonds? Of course, we are not unfriendly to US. They are not likely to do this. But this is the first time it says that, hey, Harbin, you put your money in Maybank. Next morning you wake up, Maybank say your money got frozen, no? Yeah, even though the probability is very low, it created fear among everybody else. If you are Saudi Arabia, right? You are UAE, Japan maybe not so much because Japan is a strong ally. So if you create that fear, then US is no longer a safe haven asset. Then the holding of global US holding of treasury bills and bonds go down. That will raise the US interest rate, US borrowing costs will go up. It might not necessarily be in US interest. That's why Janet Yellen is very cautious about this. Let me mention one last point on Crossroads Relations. I've spoken to a lot of Taiwanese young people. It's quite interesting. I think if you look at the Chinese revaluation, President Xi now is more cautious because they see the US military quite strong. The Western unity was quite strong with US and Europe. More important, the PLA hotheads, those hotheads guys who talk about silent warfare and all kinds of things, now more restrained. So that's a good sign. Taiwan also more cautious. If you look at the way Ukraine was destroyed, the refugee ran to Poland and everything. Where is the Taiwanese refugee going to go to? Some of them might swim to Singapore or to Okinawa, So she's also more cautious, and the danger of being used as a pawn. So there is actually a potential now. Just now, the speaker was talking about Ukraine. There is a danger that actually, which I think might happen as the Ukraine war situation drag on. The cost to US and Europe become too high. It's already starting to happen in US. Kissinger has already mentioned it. They might eventually have to sacrifice Zelensky. So he might be sacrificed in order to pacify Putin. So Taiwan population saw all the devastation and war. They are also worried because US will give you weapon, you will fight, but who died? You will die, So I talked to some young people. Some of them are very gung ho, we are quite. Then they saw all the casualty and then they said, hey, better stay with status quo. Don't do anything. Which I think is a good thing. This Ukraine war is a bit like rehearsal. So like we want to fight a boxing match, and then I thought I can beat you. Then we have a rehearsal, and then suddenly I discover that I can be really mortally wounded. So let's live and let live. So I now talk a bit about ASEAN. ASEAN, actually, we are in a good position. ASEAN, firstly, ASEAN has benefited because the cost structure is favorable to us, right? As you are aware, the Chinese factory costs has keep going up. So market forces is shifting more production into ASEAN. And then Trump added another advantage, the trade and tech war shifted even more the production into ASEAN. And then now the geopolitical supply chain instability and uncertainty shifted even more to ASEAN. So in a way, ASEAN is a chief beneficiary, and I have a lot of charts, but I don't need to show it. Harbins even have more than me in terms of the ASEAN benefiting from all this shift overall. And of course, ASEAN has to be careful in the sense that this shift resulted in greater dependence. If you look at this World Bank econometric estimate, 1 percentage point slowdown in China caused a 1.3 percentage slowdown in Singapore's GDP. This is more than one, no? It's a very significant thing. China is a big locomotive now, no? 1 percentage point slowdown in China GDP is 0.8 percentage point in Malaysia, 0.6 in Indonesia, 0.5% in Philippines, and 0.4% in Thailand. So it's not in the interest of ASEAN to antagonize or China to collapse, no? Because it's the largest locomotive now. And Trump's trade war has actually aggravated this. If you look carefully at this chart, after Trump's trade war in 2018, 2019, in 2020, the China's largest trading partner now is ASEAN, no? 649.5 billion. It is larger. Europe is number 2 and US is number 3, no? China's largest trading partner now is ASEAN. This explains why China has focused a lot of its diplomatic resources on ASEAN. You look at Wang Yi, he's all over the place, no? ASEAN is a very important trading partner. It is a strategic importance to China. And 2020, this is 2022, 2020. 2022 is even higher. So in some way, excuse me, ASEAN is a big beneficiary. You remember when US was focusing on the war on terror, George Bush never come, even Condoleezza Rice never come to ASEAN meeting. Now everybody wants to come to ASEAN meeting and cultivate ASEAN. ASEAN is a young lady, sitting there at the dance floor. Nobody bothered to ask her to dance. Suddenly China asked her to dance. Everybody now want to ask her to dance. The only problem is ASEAN has to be careful. Don't trip on your high heel, So that is a potential. So I think it's interesting to note now. You look at the survey; these are not general people, opinion maker. China is viewed as a major trading partner, but China people are fearful, not totally trusted in terms of the thing. So ASEAN, I think, understandably, has enormous rising dependence. So it's a fact of life, but China is looming very large, and trust is, of course, you are too big. People are fearful of you. So in a way, it's in the interest of ASEAN to have US, Japan, others to balance up as investors and others. some people say China is a panda bear. Chinese always say we are a panda bear. You look at the panda bear, it's smiling, small, very cute, you know. Hey, have you been to Sichuan? You go to Sichuan, you see the huge panda bear that is not that one you see in the zoo. You know? The panda bear in Sichuan is huge, you know. I've been there. The claws are very sharp, you know. It's not many people have seen it because China didn't export this. They only send the jia jia lan lan, all this ting ting tang tang for you in the zoo. No, they didn't send you the huge one. So it's important to understand what's happening. Now, future trend. Sorry. If you look at the whole world, in the last 40 years, China is the biggest beneficiary of globalization. This chart shows you the survey of the population. How many percent of the people say global trade increase their wages? How many percent say the global trade increase their jobs opportunity? China is among the highest. US, Japan, Italy, France is low, no? Because global trade take away the factories, you know, reduce their job and create uncertainty. And that's the reason Trump won the election. So China, in a way, is a beneficiary of global trade, and it is not in their interest to undermine globalization. But of course, now world is fragmented. Globalization is fragmented. So I will use an analogy. China was very poor in the early days. When I went with Goh Keng Swee to visit Deng Xiaoping, he asked us to make a calculation with Gu Mu and Zhao Ziyang on the GDP per capita of China. At that point, it's not so easy, you know, because their MPS system is the central planning system. You have to convert into the UN system GDP. So we calculate that China's GDP per capita was lower than sub-Saharan Africa in 1980. So China had no bargaining power. So China was willing to accept anything, and US opened up the market. China was very happy. So the post-war global environment is underpinned by World Bank, IMF, UN, and WTO and others. It's like a mansion built by the US. US has hegemony. But to be fair to US was quite generous in helping Japan to EU to recover. It built the mansion, is the landlord, it controlled the whole mansion. And China is a small fry. Its total GDP size is slightly bigger than New York State. So Deng's bargaining power was big. So US say, oh, Deng, you want to come into the mansion? Okay, you go to the basement, there's a room there you can sit. So Deng was willing to sit at the basement. That's why he said, hide your brightness and beat your time. Then he become bigger. Then he asked for, can I move from the basement to the living room a bit? Give me a room. Okay, you get a room. No toilet. So he's not happy. So after a while, Trump hammered China, and China decided that they have to move up. That's why they built the BRI, they built the AIIB, they built their separate institution. Effectively, they have moved out and tried to build another mansion. But when you move to the neighborhood, you are not totally out. Putin want to burn down the mansion. It's not in the interest of China to burn down the mansion because, as I said, it is a beneficiary of globalization. So the relationship is more complex. You look at some of these little children running around. Sometimes they play and then they tie their leg together, hop, hop, hop. It's not in the interest of one child to push the other guy down because your legs are tied together. So there's some convergent dynamics. There's also a lot antagonistic dynamics. So I would say the relationship is quite complex, and the Chinese are pragmatic enough. As long as their red line of Taiwan is not crossed, I think they are not likely to create serious problem for the global system. So I see the situation is like kettle. The kettle, you got water boiling, you got to heat it up. It might even boil, or whatever. As long as the red line is not crossed, the kettle might not explode. So that is hopefully the case overall. And at the end, I like to quote Lee Kuan Yew. I have the privilege of working for Lee Kuan Yew for a short while, sometime before he passed away. And what would Lee Kuan Yew think? Lee Kuan Yew has always said that one should not underestimate the US. I think he has a strong point. Incidentally, this quote, as you can see from here, saying about the US ability to draw talent, you cannot find it in his public speeches. I found it with Joseph Nye, who mentioned it. So what Lee Kuan Yew did was, he did not mention this point publicly. He mentioned it privately to Joseph Nye, who probably went back to tell the White House. So, because if he mentioned it publicly, he might offend the Chinese. So Lee Kuan Yew is able to segment. Sometimes he say this to different audience. But the problem is now with internet, you can search. Last time you can segment the audience. So this is to say that you should not underestimate US revitalization, rejuvenation capacity, and China need to be a bit more cautious. So maybe I will just end here. Yeah, thank you.
Oh yeah. Yeah, please, type in your questions. So we'll try to entertain as many as possible. I guess with Lee Kuan Yew's quote there, Professor, if Mr. Mentor was with us today, what kind of advice do you think he'll be, giving China?
I think, you see, if you were to come back, it would be also difficult for him. He was lucky to die at a point when the geopolitical tension was not so acrimonious. So I remember, in the early days, China was not so knowledgeable. So Gu Kengsui, LKY was there, and the Chinese appreciated them because they were not so knowledgeable. They want to improve their airport. They want to improve their power plant. They want to set up saving system. They want to do the factory. So we were teachers, and they were willing to learn. I remember when I was teaching 15 years ago, a lot of my students, I mentioned something, everybody took notes. Now I go and visit them, they are in charge of 5-8 million males, bigger than Singapore. So I'm very humble now. So it is a very different world, and they feel that, as I said, Teng told us when we met him in 85, for 2,000 years, they were the number one power in the world. In the last 150 years, they went to decline. Now they are a returning power. If you do statistic or complex system, there's a dynamic called reversion to the mean. Reversion to the mean. That means 1,800 years was a norm. 150 years was an aberration. And they are reverting to the mean from their perspective. And this is a certain mindset that is deeply entrenched in a Middle Kingdom perspective. So I don't know how to change that. This is Kissinger said that Kissinger is quite a good student of China. He said that when they built the forbidden cities, the astrology, the astrologer were looking at the star, and then at that point the knowledge of universe was limited. So the emperor's astrologer were analyzing, and then they were positioning the center of the universe at that point, at the point where it was in the middle of the Tiananmen. And then they built the Tiananmen. That was a mindset, no? So imagine how devastation to their self-respect when a few British go and come around and suddenly they got totally devastated in their military. It took them 150 years to recover. And so I think when I have traveled around the whole country. I've been to, I must be one of the few Singaporeans who have been to all the provinces, 31 provinces, Xinjiang, Tibet, all over. I talked to all kinds of people, from peasants, migrant workers, to party secretary. There is this deep entrenched dimension that their time has come. And that, I think, is both opportunity and a big risk for China and for the world.
I guess we've got questions coming in, so I'll just try to put some together. I guess there's 2 or 3 from about Singapore. From John, how can Singapore manage the situation given that we have to choose between China or US? Have we done well so far? Another question related to that is, are you seeing Singapore as bending more towards the US than towards China? So I guess.
Yeah, I think if you read the People's Daily and even Global Times, the last 1 year, China has actually made some positive noise about Singapore. Partly because PM go to White House and then also say something that China is important to the region, don't fight, all kinds of things. And then he went to recently in Japan, the Nikkei conference. So they see Singapore as, compared to 3-4 years ago, who sort of were a bit more anti-China, become a bit more balanced. So they make some noise on that. If you read the things very carefully between the lines, they even say that this White House should listen to Lee Hsien Loong's advice and everything. So I think PM has played quite well. On one side, we talk to the US on military cooperation. On the other side, you make some noise here. So that is quite important overall. But because situation has not come to a crunch, you see. So it's okay. There are still space in between. You look at 2 elephants when they are moving against each other or whatever. Singapore is a squirrel. You still got some space in between. But if the elephant really go into serious conflict, and the squirrel can become a pancake, Yeah, we have to be quite careful. Yeah.
There's a question here from our Malaysian colleagues. How can Malaysia capitalize on opportunities that arise from current events?
Malaysia.
Yeah.
Malaysia, in a way, is in a more advantageous position because militarily, Malaysia is less dependent on US for protection, weapons, and everything. And the Islamic dimension created some tension between the West and Malaysia, including Indonesia. So if you look at China's broad strategy, they want to cultivate ASEAN, and so they started out with you see, if you are rising sun, your sun is getting bigger and bigger, you eventually want some planet around you, right? Initially, as I said, Teng was a small planet, is not much bigger than Mercury. So he's happy to revolve around the US sun. Then he become bigger and bigger. Then he feel that he is his own sun. So he wants some planet around. And the first planet, of course, is our friend Cambodia. I visited Cambodia. They are in China's pocket. All the minister have job works with China. So is their Mercury. And then Laos, then after that, Myanmar, then they hope that Thailand, Malaysia. So they create a bit of a dynamics. But of course, some bigger planet might try to move here and then move there, and then another sun. So it's a complex dynamic. I once was a physics major in cosmology. Sometimes this planetary motion, if it's too center sun, can be highly unstable. So we are in a present. I would say that at the moment, Malaysia is geopolitically in a more advantageous position than
A question here from Samuel. What is the thinking behind China's push into the Pacific Islands, Australia agreements such as the Solomon Islands?
Yeah, the Pacific Island is China has been working on it for a long time. The main reason is very simple. It's same as what I mentioned of South China Sea. I used to be economist focusing mostly on finance economics. Now, as I expanded my knowledge on military geopolitics, a small island can be very significant, even though economically it's not significant. If you analyze the Pacific War, which is a war between Japan and US, when Japan was trying to build its gold prosperity field, the Pacific Island and Taiwan was very, very significant. No, Taiwan was used as a base to transport the troops down to go into Southeast Asia because all the oil and rubber and raw materials were here. And Pacific Island was a key area of big fight between US and Japan because a lot of the military bases, plane and everything, you need an island. So if China has a base in their satellite transmission, a lot of when you have a military thing, the satellite transmission, the informations, all the others reconnaissance system will need another base there. And of course, if their submarine move and go to the Pacific Ocean to have the second strike, they might need a base to come up and refuel, restock. So these are very, very significant. In fact, I think the push on Pacific Island was there, but it was significantly speed up because of AUKUS, the AUKUS arrangement between the others. So what we are witnessing is that actually all kinds of pieces moving, and even if Lee Kuan Yew come back from Cambridge today, it will be not easy for him. We are now in a point where we are driving. Now, last time Lee Kuan Yew came back, of course, there are a lot of problems, but he was driving. Singapore was a small motorbike, and then the road was okay, so you continue to move. Now, Lawrence Wong got a better car, but the road is very winding. The fog is very unclear. You don't know, no? You want to drive a bit faster, you might go into the ditch. Yeah, because you cannot see too far ahead. You look at the Ukraine war, within 1 month, 2 months, things shift, And I predict that the euphoria of beating Putin will come down, and then this Zelensky, like a hero, Churchillian hero, might be sacrificed, because he might become an obstacle. China, US, Europe might want to accommodate Putin so that they don't have to spend too much resources in handling Putin. Then they can focus on China. You cannot have a two-front war. No? You fight Putin, you fight Xi Jinping, and Putin getting closer to Xi Jinping. It's not the best strategy. The neocon in US, which is pushing for this Ukraine war, will gradually face some resistance. And I think Kissinger is starting to say, I think the tide will turn.
There's a question here on Hong Kong. What will happen to Hong Kong? Does it still have a role as an international financial center or become a Venice?
Well, Firstly, has Hong Kong collapsed? Has Hong Kong property price gone down? It remained flat. Has Hong Kong become more stable for business? It has, no? So what will happen? What will happen? In Tiananmen, 1989, when the tank moved in, a lot of people run, a lot of business run away, you know. A lot of people that I know who were students at that point went away. Now, my asset management company just hired an MD who ran away during Tiananmen in Canada and come back. Now he is one of the guy who helped us to market the fund in Shanghai. So this is, Hong Kong is a smaller perturbation than Tiananmen. But of course, if Xi Jinping mismanaged the thing, which could be, this guy, you know, in China, he after a while become too old and calcified here, he could become a problem. But so far, you know, the place is still doing okay. But Chinese system has certain strength. It's centralized and it can mobilize the people very well. So it's a bit like Dragon Boat. No? You look at Dragon Boat, the Dragon Boat that win the race need not be those where the people who row the boat are the most capable people. It's just that they row in unison, in cooperation, in cohesiveness. And then you got this guy called Xi Jinping, tung, 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 everybody row in the same way. Individually, as an individual, as a corporate, as a financial sector, the US guy who is rowing the boat might be more capable. But collectively, they might cancel each other out, you know. And so the final net result is that the boat might not do as well. This is the case for India. Individual Indians are very good, no? The system so far hasn't able to garner them together. That's why they are running Microsoft and Google there. Imagine the Indians can roll together like the Chinese. Then you will go back to 1800. 1800, China was 34% of the US GDP, global GDP. India was 32% of the world GDP. America is 2.1%. Europe is only about 18%. That was the world 300 years ago. So,
Okay, I think we have time perhaps for just one last question, just to wrap up. Here's a question on, Professor, could you share your thoughts on the upcoming China conference? With Xi seeking a third term, will there be a split in the key positions? Which two sides, which camps?
I think China, Xi, of course, now is under pressure because of the weak economy, you know, the tech sector, higher employment, and the economy weakening, property market, and all kinds of complaints. But the Chinese power structure, the military control is very important. Li Keqiang now is, you know, quite popular. He's boosting up the economy, but he doesn't control the military, you know. He doesn't control the internal security and the public security. So he can make some noise, but in the overall scheme of things, he's not important. And I predict, even if COVID situation did not get resolved easily, Xi Jinping was still, is almost 99.9% sure of the next 5 years. Now the issue is how many of his prodigy can go up, and some might be, you know, sacrificed because of some of this temporary setback.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor. I think that was very enlightening.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, Dr. Tan. Thank you, Dr. Chua. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly remain seated as we prepare to start the next session. For virtual participants, kindly log out of this session and into the next, where our special guest will be Minister of State Alvin Tan.